And amen. Luke 14, as we are preaching from the Lectionary Cycle C series in this season, today's teaching is taken out of Luke, the 14th chapter, the 25th and through 33rd verses. And in the New Revised Standard Version, hear what it says. Now large crowds were traveling with him. And he turned and said to them, whoever comes to me and does not hate father and mother, wife and children, brothers and sisters, yes, and even life itself, cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not carry the cross and follow me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, intending to build a tower, does not first sit down and estimate the cost, to see whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it will begin to ridicule him, saying, this fellow began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to wage war against another king will not sit down first and consider whether he is able with 10,000 to oppose the one who comes against him with 20,000? If he cannot, then while the other is still far away, he sends a delegation and asks for the terms of peace. So therefore, none of you can become my disciple if you do not give up all your possessions. I want to arrest your time for a moment in the spirit as we hear this preaching subject, counting the cost. Many theologians, scholars, ministers, many of the beloved community that would recognize themselves as believers, as they journey individually and collectively, find themselves at some point at a crossroad, which causes them to pause and to consider the true cost of being a disciple of Christ. They get to a crossroad that would challenge them to try and estimate and understand the full value of this journey. What exactly, Grace, does it mean for us individually, vertically? What does it mean for us collectively, horizontally, to be a disciple of Jesus? What is the overt and the covert cost and sacrifice being required of my life? And what is it that my soul is really being bidded towards? 20th century German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer says in his book, The Cost of Discipleship, when Christ calls us, he bids us to come and die. Bonhoeffer says, costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again and again. The gift which must be asked for, the door at which we must knock. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow. And it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs us our life. And it is grace because it gives us the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and it's grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it costs God the life of his Son. Don't you know that you were bought at a price? And what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace, because God did not reckon his Son too dear a price to pay for our life, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. Bonhoeffer is simply teaching us that we must embody this message. We must become transformed by the strength of this message. This life of Christianity is one that we must love and endear and put first before everything. We must put our personal agendas away, no matter how attractive, no matter how lucrative, no matter how endearing they are. We can't wait for the approval of our parents to be on this journey. We can't wait for our friends to get their mind together and to think that journey that we are on, called the journey of Jesus Christ, to become popular. We can't have it our way. It's not a Burger King experience. It's costly, and it becomes more valuable than anything else. There is nothing that can compare to counting the cost of this journey that we are on as disciples of Jesus. Evangelical Southern Baptist pastor of New Life in New York, Peter Scazzaro, the author of Emotionally Healthy Church, agrees with Bonhoeffer as he invites this other insight. After years of preaching a very strict and conservative gospel, Peter had an awakening, an epiphany moment, where he realized that his journey with God is one that has to be more contemplative, and his journey with God was stuck, and his journey needed to be massaged and handled in a new way. And Scazzaro recognized that this discipleship journey that we're finding ourselves on becomes stuck because people attempt to love God only at the surface of the iceberg that we call life. And he realized that there's emotional baggage that is below the surface, that the issues that are below the surface are so weighty that they need immediate attention, and the only way that we can give the attention needed is to have this embodied relationship with God. And the only way that we can have an embodied relationship with God is to spend intentional time with God. Scazzaro would say, our churches are in trouble because they're filled with people who are unsure of how to biblically integrate anger, sadness, and other emotions. Our churches are in trouble because they're filled with people who are defensive and incapable of revealing their weaknesses. The church is in trouble because it's filled with people that are threatened by or intolerant to different viewpoints. He says the churches are in trouble because they're filled with people who are zealous about ministering at church, but blind to their spouse's loneliness at home. The churches are in trouble because they're filled with people who are so involved in serving that they fail to take care of themselves. That churches are in trouble because they're filled with people who are prone to withdraw from conflict rather than resolve it. And though we want to love God, we are emotionally unable to become successful because of all of the weightiness that is below the surface of the iceberg. So in our narrative today, in this lectionary series of preaching the Gospel of Luke, we find in our lectionary teaching today, Jesus himself is using a Semitic idiom, meaning he is using a Jewish expression, a Jewish voice, and comparing how to love God. He is not teaching hate, but he is teaching in a Jewish way, which warns that if we put anything before God, that we must then, in return, hate God. But if we can learn to just flip the order and put God first and love God more than anything else that is meaningful to us, then we are on the correct road of becoming a disciple of Jesus. He's trying to teach this kingdom living process. He's trying to teach us and emphasize and impress upon us the weightiness of counting the cost of our discipleship. So we see Jesus take two careful illustrations to emphasize this heaviness, to emphasize this counting the costs. Only a foolish individual, Jesus would say, would start building a project without first looking at the budget and assuring that they are able to complete that in which they started. He says, what king goes to war without enough force? Jesus says in the 26th verse of this teaching, if anyone comes to me, this means that if anyone is seeking salvation, there are conditions that you must be ready to accept. You can't put anything. If you want to seek me, if you want to come to me, if you want salvation out of this process, you can't put anything before me, not even your personal desires, not even the family, not even your spouse that I blessed you with. You must give it all up. Give up your own agenda. Pick up your cross. In earlier teachings in Luke chapter 9, we find that Jesus would teach us that not only do we have to pick up our cross, but that we have to deny of ourselves first, and then pick up our cross, and then follow him. And Jesus would teach, because what shall it profit us if we gain the whole world? What shall it profit us to be the most popular person in the group? What shall it profit us to have all of the best possessions? What shall it profit us to gain the world but lose our soul? Come to me. Pick up your cross. You must begin to find joy in this journey. Find joy and strength and peace in the tension of sitting in the uncomfortableness of the journey that God has sketched out for you. And only then, in that space, this process of coming to Jesus begins to happen. It is in that space that we begin to embody the process, the good days, the bad days, the uncertain days, the joyful days, the tearful days, the painful days. It is in that tension of being with God, coming and seeking without an agenda other than the perfect will of God, that we're able to experience transformation and the incarnation process of God leading becomes our story and our narrative. Howard Thurman, one of my conversation partners in meditation, says Christians have both Jesus and Christ. In Jesus, God is given a face and a heart we could trust in one moment of time. Christ is God's presence incarnated in all of creation, before and beyond time, counting the cost. Sometimes we have to slow down enough grace to begin the process of counting the cost. We have to stop always trying to do and learn how to be. And I understand, because I'm a witness myself, that it is in the being, in the tension, that it is the nakedness and the bloodiness of the cross that we have to deal with. And in that space, it is very vulnerable. And in that space, we open up ourselves for another knife to come into our back. Is in that space of opening up and being naked and vulnerable and bloody. That all the experiences that we have tried to heal from and maybe even avoid may come flooding back. But it is only in that space that we build strength. Paul says that it builds character to give us the strength to endure. What I want us to take away from our teaching on today are the following principles. That when we're counting the cost, dedication to Jesus must replace dedication to everyone and everything else. Dedication to Jesus, what Jesus has assigned us to, what Jesus has called us to. Dedication to Jesus must become first in our heart. Then I want you to know that discipleship is never cheap, nor is it easy. Bonhoeffer says we cheapen it when we try to enter into that process without having enough regard to confess who we really are. We cheapen that process without having the humility that we are called to. Doesn't God require of us to walk humbly with him? We cheapen that process trying to make it easy when it's a road that is stony that we tried. But for those principles to become embodied and incarnated in us, first we have to deal with those issues in our life that are below and at the bottom of the iceberg. What causes us to have the emotions we have? We have to ask God to help us to become emotionally sober. We have to ask God to help us to become transparent and vulnerable. And in doing so, this is the beginning to the healing that we have secretly prayed for, that we have publicly cried about. It is in that space that transformation will take place. Second, we have to be ready to surrender it all. Every relationship which causes you to stumble, every connection which causes you to stay stagnant, every relationship which hinders you has to be replaced. This begins the death process, which Jesus calls us to. Finally, when counting the costs, remember this and be encouraged by these words, that God has a plan. And no matter how hard, no matter how difficult, no matter how lonely, no matter how uncertain we may feel in these spaces, individually and even collectively, as we are marching to a higher place, trusting in God, we must remember that the plan that God has for us is never a plan to hinder us. It's never a plan to trip us up. It's never a plan to count us out. It's never a plan to leave us behind. But the plan that God has for us is a plan that will heal us, a plan that will strengthen us, a plan that will grow us, a plan that will bring us to our destiny. For the plans that God has for us is a plan for a future and a plan for hope. We have to learn how to count the cost and be accountable for our stuff. A lot of people want to get on this journey and they want to ride on this journey like it's an HOV land journey and get there by riding on the prayers of the past, or get there by riding on the character of a friend, or get there by riding on past accomplishments. But this journey is one that turns and twists and jerks and jabs. It's a two-edged sword that cuts going and coming. And we have to be accountable for this journey personally. This is a journey that calls us to spend time in the face of God and to learn how to let our ego and our pride go. We can't worry about what somebody think about us. We can't get caught up in thinking that somebody thinks that we done got soft, that, I'm the smartest one on the block and this person can't tell me what to do. We can't get tripped up in the flesh like that on this journey. For come to me, but die of you, so that I can exalt you, and so that you can see the fullness of what it is that God has for you. Count the cost. Count the cost. The hymn writer, Danette, says that we have to learn how to surrender. We have to surrender it all. I think he says, all to Jesus I surrender. All to him I freely give. I will ever love and trust him. In his presence I daily live. I surrender all.